Welcome to the Greater Austin STEM Ecosystem Networking Forum. Just a little bit about the Greater Austin STEM Ecosystem in case you're not familiar. The Greater Austin STEM Ecosystem is here to foster collaborations across networks and systems throughout our community to ensure that STEM programs are accessible to all throughout Greater Austin. We are learning centered, we are focused on leveraging resources across our community with aiming to reduce duplication and really amplifying all of the things that are happening across our community in STEM spaces. Our vision is that all learners have that opportunity to get those STEM skills to enter STEM jobs in Central Texas, if that is the pathway that they so choose. And then we also want to ensure that all educators, and by all we mean all parents and corporate representatives and STEM role models and students and K-12 and higher ed spaces, are able to have those tools that support them to help them get to be STEM competent and STEM literate. So what do we have going on within the ecosystem? Well, we've got our 2021 date set, so take a look. We have all of this information updated on our Greater Austin STEM Ecosystem website, and all events are available for registration now. And as we formalize the details and the agendas, we'll be updating that information online. But go ahead and sign up so you get reminders, or go ahead and put those on your calendar so you're ready to join in the rest of this year. I'd also like to point out that we have a call for Ecosystem Action Team members out and about right now. So if you are interested in joining in on any of these efforts to really rally the community, to look at, are there goals or initiatives that we as a community can really rally around to advance any of these areas, anything that we can do to foster collaboration in these spaces, awareness in these spaces, amplify things in these spaces, please consider joining in on our action teams. As the ecosystem, part of what we really have been talking about as our steering committee is, what are some things that we as a community can really rally around? What are some things that if we across the entire STEM ecosystem, all the educators, all the informal STEM providers, everybody really was on the same page about, we could really advance STEM in our community. And what you're going to hear about today is something that I think makes sense in this space. If we're all sharing the same message about math pathways and their importance and how we need to really be sending the message to parents and educators in this space, we can maybe advance the number of students who are heading into these STEM spaces, who have those STEM skills that we need to get them into our colleges and into these careers down the road. So this is kind of step one of helping to educate our community on what the data says, what are these math pathways, what the heck are we talking about, so that we as perhaps a community can really come together as this whole ecosystem and help collectively advance what's happening. So welcome. I'm excited about our two presenters. We have Susan Dawson from E3 Alliance, and we have Ryan Torbey. He's with CS for Texas and the Texas Advanced Computing Center at UT Austin. We'll hear from both of them. We'll have time for questions as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to get us started.
Great, thank you. I'm going to click the share screen button and get that shared. All right. Can everyone hear me okay? I think that's good. Great. Okay, so my name is Ryan Torbey, and today I'm going to be presenting something that has come out of our research at the Expanding Pathways in Computing group at the University of Texas at Austin. We are housed under TAC, which is the Texas Advanced Computing Center. And this research is about Algebra 1 and its relationship to computer science participation in high school. So my name is Ryan Torbey. I am a former computer science teacher. I did kindergarten through about 7th grade computer science for a few years in Austin. And before that, I was actually started teaching through Teach for America. and my placement site was the Navajo Nation in New Mexico. So super rural location there, and I spent 2 years out there before moving to Austin, and I was employed by Harmony Schools in Austin, which is a STEM-focused charter school network. Before leaving Harmony and leaving the classroom to pursue my PhD. So I'm now a PhD candidate, done all the classes, and I'm finishing up my dissertation, which is really, really exciting. And I'm working at TAC, and we're doing some amazing research with computer science education, but also how it kind of interacts and connects in with some of the other STEM subjects like math. And that's what we'll be talking about today. You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Torbey. So first, I want to say I did not do this research alone, and I want to talk about the other co-authors of the paper. One is Dr. Nicole Martin. She's also with our team at TAC. We have Dr. Jace Warner, also at our team at TAC. And then Dr. Carol Fletcher, who leads We Teach CS and is a huge champion of computer science education advocacy in the state of Texas. So let's dive in to what the research is and what basically the bulk of what I'm presenting today. First, I want to talk about access and participation of computer science. So part of measuring computer science and success in expanding computer science is figuring out where actually the numbers are. So we looked at the data, and in the 2017 to 18 school year, which as of last year, that was the most recent that we had access to the data for, it has been updated, but this research was done on those numbers or that school year. So 43% of public schools in Texas offered one or more computer science courses. So we're actually under half, which is not very good because there is Texas state code that is directs school districts to have every high school offer computer science. So many schools are not in accordance with that, but that's, I think a whole nother issue. So 79% of Texas high school students, about 1.1 million students, attended one of those schools that offered computer science. So big schools are actually offering it more often than smaller schools. With participation, our numbers dropped way down. We only had slightly less than 4% of high school students in Texas took a computer science course in 2017-18. And then for this study, we actually split computer science courses, and we have advanced computer science coursework and then non-advanced or regular computer science courses. And we only had 1% of high school students take an advanced computer science course. So I think the next question is why? Why are we seeing that those low participation numbers? And I wanted to address that in some research-based statements that I'm going to make that link it into school tracking and academic tracking. So I think that computer science is a field which is linked to a high financial reward and a significant level of power in our society. And systematically, these types of fields have historically been structurally guarded for access by already privileged groups. So in the United States, the depth, breadth, and quality of education differs, sometimes immensely, depending on a variety of factors, such as socioeconomic status, race, and zip code. Inequitable separation of students has a long history in the United States, and before Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, schools in much of the country were segregated. But when segregation in schools ended, other means were used to separate children, following the rules of desegregation, but not adhering to the spirit of what desegregation was all about. And what ended up happening in our education system nationwide is that students often existed in the same school building, but were separated into different academic tracks. And we saw an uptick in academic tracking. So sometimes academic tracking is actually referred to as second generation segregation. And due to tracking, our schools often provide students in the same building with very different academic experiences. And if many of you, I think, are of an age where academic tracking was in your high school experience. So if I think back to my high school experience long ago, we had several levels of academic tracking. And then we also had academic tracking where I grew up in Massachusetts. We had a large Brazilian population, and ELL students, English language learning students, were actually segregated into their own hallway and were segregated in their classwork. And that's, these students are not only taking different levels of the same course, but many students are taking different courses altogether. And I think that may be part of what's influencing computer science and computer science participation. But that is basically theoretical. So part of this research was to look at what's actually going on. So we know that over 70% of Texas students have access to a computer science course in high school. But then a complex web of factors is influencing whether or not a student enrolls in computer science in high school. So this study was trying to contribute to our understanding and our existing understanding of what factors influence participation in computer science courses. We know already through many studies that if you are a female student, you are less likely to be participating and actually enrolling in a computer science course. We know that if you are a student from a low socioeconomic household, you are less likely to be enrolling in a computer science course. But our study was trying to contribute to that. So we added in some extra factors, and I'll talk about that in a second. So basically our main questions were what factors predict whether students will enroll in a CS course when available at their school. And then we also looked at that for an advanced CS course. And our data source was the Texas Education Resource Center. So Texas is a lucky state in that all of our school districts actually report all of their data to a centralized location. Many schools actually, or states, don't have this, and their schools all sit on the data and it doesn't come and be aggregated into a central location. So for the 2017 and 2018 school year, we pulled all the data and then limited for this study because we were looking at participation. We limited that to schools that only offered computer science. So that was 1.1 million high school students attended a school that offered computer science. And then that's a slightly less for schools that offered advanced CS. For us, we used logistic regression, which is a predictive modeling that it's basically important to use that if you have a dichotomous variable. So our dichotomous variable is whether or not a student is enrolled in computer science, and it allows us to control for other factors in our model. We have several variables that we plugged into this model that many were based on kind of a theory of what is influencing or what factors influence or have predictive nature in students enrolling in computer science. Algebra before high school had actually not been tested to our knowledge before, but we added it in. Gender, economically disadvantaged students, underrepresented minorities, students, rural students. So this list is things that we thought may actually influence our ability to predict whether a student is enrolled in computer science or not. We also looked at some school level factors like the total number of CS courses at a school and the program length, the total number of students, and the percentage of students economically disadvantaged. We also looked at, for our first model, whether or not the student or the school had advanced computer science. For our second model, which focused on advanced computer science, we did not look at that. So what was our findings? Our findings with logistic regression, it actually reports it in odds, and I just need to present this with the caveat that odds are not probabilities. You can look up some great resources online to better describe the differences between odds and probabilities, but I'm not going to go into that right here. So basically, when we're looking at the charts that our model output produced, what you want to look at is in the very far right column, we have the p-value. A p-value of under 0.05 is considered statistically significant. So most of our factors actually were considered statistically significant. And then the other really important column here is the odds ratio. So we'll talk about the odds ratio in a second. This is our chart that we have outputted for the predicting CS course enrollment. And then we also had a chart that was predicting the advanced CS course enrollment. So in order to communicate these findings better, we'll use percent change in odds, which basically means the percent that the odds are shifting based on that factor. And that is the odds ratio -1 multiplied by 100. So if you are lost, don't worry. I'll have a few kind of clearer statements here, and then we'll go into some, I guess, broader discussion. So our main finding here, and one that actually surprised us, was the strength of algebra before high school as a predictive factor in predicting whether a student was enrolled in computer science. So controlling for all other variables in the model, students who took Algebra 1 before high school had double the odds of being enrolled in a CS course when compared to students who did not take Algebra 1 before high school. So the odds increased by about 100%. For advanced computer science courses, when you control for all other variables in the model, students who took Algebra 1 before high school had over double the odds, again, of being enrolled in an advanced CS course. And that increase was actually about 150%. So there are other notable findings here. If you look on the second line, gifted and talented programs, enrolling in a gifted and talented program increased the odds by about 70%, 77%. And that, again, so these two factors that are increasing the odds so much actually are the two factors in our model which really, really link into tracking and academic tracking. So we have algebra before high school. Are you on that advanced track in math? And then we have gifted and talented, which are you identified as gifted and talented and potentially on an advanced track? So I do want to talk about this, and I think there's some really important aspects to look at. One is that I think some CS courses have Algebra 1 as a prerequisite, and I'm not sure that that's a good thing. We want to increase, as part of the CS for All movement, we want to increase the number of students participating in computer science. And Algebra 1 historically has been this gatekeeper course. It's been linked to a lot of advanced coursework in high school and also success in college. And when you use Algebra 1 as a gatekeeper course for something I think is important as computer science, it's maybe not a great test of if you are successful in algebra, you'll be successful in computer science. And a lot of the content, while there are some algebraic concepts in computer science, a lot of the content is already taught by teachers embedded in the computer science courses because students forget it from Algebra 1, or students sneak in and they're not necessarily in algebra. I think using Algebra 1 as a gatekeeper to computer science is a little outdated and just reinforces this idea that students on this upper track are worthy of taking this subject, but students on maybe a lower or less accelerated track are not worthy of taking a subject. I think the other thing to point out is that, maybe I believe Susan would talk about this. Some of the past E3 research has actually shown that in the like the 5th grade, 6th grade level, they're actually tracking students into math pathways at that low level. So what's happening across the country in general and in Texas is that around 5th grade or 6th grade, you're getting placed on a math track, and that math track is determining whether or not in 8th grade you take algebra. So in 5th grade, if you are being placed on a math track, that's kind of a problem because that's really, really young to be determining whether and being a predictive factor of whether you're taking, high school computer science. I think that the rigidity of those math tracks is a major problem, but also the fact that some students who quote unquote deserve to be on that accelerated track never end up on that accelerated track. We've seen things, so there was a great study out of North Carolina where they looked at placement in a district in accelerated math at that middle school level. And basically the district ended up having no standard of which they judged kids to put them on accelerated math. And that district, actually, the decisions were being made before their end of course scores were released to teachers for 5th grade. So they were getting tracked just by maybe their grades, parent recommendations. There was no standard across the district. So some schools had more of a standard than others. I think it's highly, when something that is that fuzzy, I think it's highly open to, people accidentally, most of the time, using stereotypes to end up figuring out who belongs where. And that's not good. I think the other thing is that when you look at our CS for All and the CS for All movement, so expanding computer science across our whole school system, we need to do a better job as computer science researchers of actually linking into this tracking world and linking into other subjects and figuring out that, computer science alone is very important, but it doesn't stand alone. Students are making decisions, and schools or the systems are plugging students in to these computer science courses in a way that really really isn't removed from everything else. Computer science is maybe new and exciting, but it's not removed from the larger history of United States education, and it's not removed from the larger story of STEM. So anything that we have about math/STEM pathways is often very, very tied into computer science, but as computer science advocates, a lot of times we don't think of it that way. There are structural things that really are blocking, I think, students from getting onto these pathways and then going through the pathways. And one of those things is just having pathways to begin with. Some schools are offering one course, but not a sequence of courses. And I think some of the, having in Texas, computer science ended up now under CTE. And I think having that under CTE with the focus on pathways will help, future students end up going on to pathways and schools building out pathways. So there's a lot here, a lot to unpack. And what I will do now is I want to share these slides with you. And I can paste that after my presentation in the chat. So if you would like those slides, and then I'll also share the paper that we have. The full paper, it's only 5 pages because it was a conference paper, and you can read our full research on this. So it's just at tinyurl.com/read-r-research. And right now I will open it to questions.
And everyone should be able to unmute themselves. And if you have a couple of questions, any questions for Ryan, we can also come back and ask questions after we hear from Susan. Any questions now, go ahead and you can unmute yourself and ask or throw it in the chat.
Hey, Ryan, this is Richard Togley from the Andy Roddick Foundation. I was wondering if you also looked at math opportunities outside of school, whether those students who were taking math or math-related after-school programs had any impact or effect in terms of taking up computer science?
So that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't believe our data set has that information in because we're using data at a large scale that's supplied by the district. It's mostly course-related data and kind of their formal education data. But I know from reading past research, I think that, you know, the out-of-school space is really, really important. I think that it's, in general, there's a huge questions about equity around the out of school space because sometimes students with greater means or just who happen to live in a certain zip code or happen to go to a certain school have much more access to out of school resources than other students. So I think out of school can definitely be part of the solution. But it also may be part of the problem in how those resources are distributed.
Thanks. Other questions? And again, you can throw them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. Okay, well, maybe we'll go ahead and switch on over to Susan. And again, we'll have time for questions at the end as well. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Ryan, that was a great presentation and I think a perfect tee up for what I'm going to talk about. Just so I don't forget them, a couple of things that you said that I want to make sure that we tie in. One is how Algebra 1, specifically Algebra 1 in middle school, but in general is such a predictor, not just of computer science, that's true, but of other later success factors. But I think there's an interesting balance there because our friends at the Dana Center certainly have also done some research that says that doesn't necessarily mean that it's appropriate to push everyone into Algebra 1 early. There may be some students who really struggle with that and then end up in a state where they are losing confidence in their ability to be successful in math. We have a couple of districts, Elgin and San Marcos, who have moved into Algebra 1 in middle school for all students. And there's some other districts around the state who are looking at that, but we don't have definitive data yet to be able to compare that. But we do certainly know that that way students are tracked now into accelerated courses is very arbitrary. There is no question that is, as you said, Ryan, frequently done, or not frequently, it is done in fifth grade. And the decisions that are used are often made by a single counselor or made by a single teacher and may not be any set of objective criteria that are used, at least traditionally. And so Carol is right, having more objective criteria and opt out rather than opt in measures to be able to get students opportunities for advanced math classes certainly plays out in all of our research. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I am an engineer, and so I'm used to PowerPoint and like it a lot, but I'm going to share instead what's called a some more, which is kind of an online linkable newsletter that Timai Dong, who is our current director of our Pathways of Promise work, put together for a board of directors meeting. And I thought it would be a fun way to share this with you. So I'll kind of walk through this and talk about some of the work that's been going on at E3 Alliance, really in a multi-year effort called Pathways of Promise, looking at sustainable systems to help students succeed in mathematics. And Pathways of Promise, or what we call POP, started at E3 back in the 2014 timeframe. We had been looking at course taking as a prediction of student success, and worked with the Greater Texas Foundation because in part we were very concerned about, you remember it was a long time ago and lots of policy under the bridge since then, but the huge changes to state policy that were made with HB 5 in 2013, which did a few major things. One was changing the entire school accountability system, the start of the A through F accountability, also drastically increased not just the opportunities, but the mandate for high schools to offer career-oriented courses and sequences of CTE pathways in our endorsements, but also lowered the standards for mathematics requirements. And a number of us were very, very concerned about the potential outcomes on students of lowering their expectations for math. And that was one of the reasons, the genesis to start Pathways of Promise. So Pathways of Promise is one of many initiatives at E3 Alliance. We work across the Central Texas region and now the state on a cradle to career basis. And on all of our initiatives, we use a common theory of change. And our theory of change is all based on the foundation of objective data-driven decision-making, but it looks at how do we convene and bring together stakeholders to identify insights about what might be hindering barriers for students, opportunities for students. Based around that, if there are insights that we think can be addressed, how do we build a common agenda for addressing that? Regionally, forge new collaborations. Ultimately, the intent is the what here, is how do we change practices and build capacity in those who work with students, because E3 as a backbone organization, we don't work directly with students. So whether that's schools or after school programs or whoever it is, to drive ultimately systems change. So this theory of change you'll see as we walk through the multi-year process of Pathways of Promise. So it started as a comprehensive research effort back in POP 1.0. We didn't call it 1.0 at the time because we didn't know there would be 4.0 versions now. But at the time, it was the most comprehensive research that had ever been done statewide on both CTE, which we're not going to talk about today, but also math pathways and course takings and how that predicted later success. And that work was a combination of probably 350 slides and findings, but really the most important of all of that is what we call the scary math pipeline. And so this is the scary math pipeline that looks at what are the milestones that students hit from graduating high school, enrolling in higher ed, persisting to sophomore year, completing. We also looked at those who completed in STEM fields based on what math you were able to complete in high school. And so this gray line here is those students who passed and completed Algebra 2 in high school versus those who took 1 year beyond that. There are now many more course offerings, but at that point it was typically pre-calculus versus those who took some sort of college-aligned math, whether that was AP, IB, dual credit, something beyond pre-calculus, and what were your opportunities to enroll. This is only state data because we're using ERC data. So there's certainly some students who enroll out of state and ultimately succeed to higher ed. And what you'll see immediately is that those students who take and pass Algebra 2, which under HB 5 is optional for almost every student in the state. If you take and pass the class that's optional for most students, you have less than a 1 in 5 chance of getting any post-secondary credential, 4-year degree, 2-year degree, industry certification, anything. You have to take at least 2 years of math beyond Algebra 2 to basically predict that we will be able to hit our statewide goal of getting 60% of students by 2030 who have a post-secondary credential to meet the needs of the workforce. So essentially what it says is we're lying to every student in the state of Texas about what math you need to take in order to predict that you can succeed beyond high school. So again, lots of other findings in 1.0, but that was really the biggest one. And based on that, as always happens in research, you go back and have a million more questions. So based on that, we launched into Pathways of Promise 2.0, where we went backwards from high school. Okay, well, if students need more math in high school in order to succeed, what is happening in middle school? What's happening in elementary school? How does that predict this? And I won't dig into all of these today, but Ryan, this is exactly when we went to how are those decisions made in 5th grade about which students have access to math that would get them to Algebra 1 by 8th grade. And the answer is that it was very arbitrary. So even those students, for instance, who were already the highest performers in the state in 5th grade, if they were Black or Hispanic or low income, they were far less likely than their white or Asian peers to be put on that track to move forward in mathematics on what you might traditionally have called an accelerated path. We did some workshops statewide about starting to share some of this information with Dallas and San Antonio. We built a community, brought in our higher ed institutions to start talking about how do we move this alignment forward. We actually partnered with UT STEM on some teacher training, because a lot of what our districts told us was that our middle school teachers are not prepared to be able to engage students deeply in the kind of mathematics they need, not just to help them succeed, but help them be excited about this as a field rather than just rote problem sheets. We put together a steering committee that exists to this day, that are practitioners from our school districts and higher ed and other partners who help us interpret the data and the research as it comes out, who help us make recommendations for change. And so, for instance, this is when we published a brief that was put together, not just by E3, but with our practitioners about how to drive acceleration and completion in mathematics. And this has some of the background and explanation of some of the early research that we did. You'll see the scary math pipeline, predictions, who's taking it, and the gaps between income groups. This is also that 5th grade study. This is looking at income, where you can see those students who are most advanced tiered by quintiles, and the differences whether you're not low income or low income on who gets on that accelerated path. So a lot of this was shared, but then the point was we had specific recommendations for elementary school leaders, different from middle school leaders, different from high school leaders, about, as a leader in elementary school or middle school, what is it that you can do? Specific items that you can check off. You can ensure placement of every 5th grade student in the top 2 quintiles into that accelerated path as an opt-out. So things like that were specific recommendations that our community made to our school districts and to our district leaders to be able to change these trajectories. That also was when, and this is kind of a funny story, and if we have time later, or I encourage you offline, I'll send you this link. I promise you that you will be up singing with this noodling through your brain all night, because it is so cool. We were sitting in a community meeting with a woman who was a former nationally acclaimed Christian rock star, and we're talking about some of this math data and some of this scary math pipeline, and she literally wrote a rap on the back of her agenda that ultimately we produced with students as doing a hip hop musical called Mo Math, Mo Money, to engage students around why it's important to take more advanced math classes. So I encourage you to share this video far and wide. So after we studied all this, put out the recommendations, started tracking the recommendations district by district, we moved into POP 3.0. Each of these is roughly an 18-month, 2-year kind of effort, focused more on research about teacher preparation. What certifications are out there? How are teachers placed in schools? What are the disparities between access to certified mathematics teachers? We're able to look for the first time at outcomes related to HB5, because we had enough students who had come through high school on which endorsements did they take, how much more likely were they to go to higher ed based on endorsement, things like that. We also forged a deep partnership with the National Alliance for Partners in Equity, NAEP, because part of what we found with UT STEM is, while providing teachers with the skills that they needed to be more engaging with math, was not enough, because there were still implicit biases and ways that, based on gender, based on race and ethnicity, that teachers were engaging with students in ways that created inequities in the classroom. So had a lot of training that we continue to this day on shifting mindsets, on implicit bias, on putting in place processes that are not going to allow bias to increase disparities in classroom outcomes. We also worked with Michael and Susan Dell Foundation and the Dana Center to launch Central Texas Math Alignment Task Force, which really was now deeply looking at, we can't just change this in elementary, middle, high school, but how do we work with our higher ed institutions to align math course taking into and through college based on the career aspirations that students have. Because if a high school advisor is telling students to take statistics, and that's great, and the college advisor says, no, we don't care if you have statistics. If you didn't take calculus, I'm not going to let you into this path. Then all of a sudden we're confusing students and drawing them back. And again, it's an equity issue. So a lot of work that's gone on in the last couple of years around aligning with higher ed and course pathways. That's also when we started working on state policy, particularly around the Texas Success Initiative, the TSI assessment, which is not representative of the range of math skills that are needed to succeed, B, highly inequitable, and C, even the College Board will tell you that a single one-day test is not a good prediction of success. So we're really excited about this, working with the coordinating board. We've now completely revised the TSI math test. It is now going to be much more representative of the range of skills required for math. And we have now implemented multiple measures. Part of that was moved forward because of COVID, but now students are deemed college ready in math by a set of measures that may not be just the TSI assessment, but also GPA or courses taken or things like that. I want to go down into, let me come back to some of this data, but where's our policy map? This is a good snapshot of the way that we implemented these recommendations, and this has been multiple years and they've changed over time, was by basically creating a way to track and to have peer pressure. So we looked at each of these elementary school, middle school, and high school recommendations. And these might be opt out or train counselors to counsel differently or whatever it is. And then by district, whether it's Austin, Bastrop, Del Valle, Eanes, all of our 15 districts, they track whether they're planning to implement this particular recommendation, because not everybody is going to do everything, whether they've started planning, whether they are implementing, have institutionalized, and then it's completely fully implemented. For instance, Lockhart has fully implemented whatever this policy recommendation is. And this has been a really, really important strategy to, again, not just track what everybody's doing so somebody can say, oh, if Lockhart's done this, maybe I can pick up the phone and call them how they did it to help me. But it's peer pressure. It's okay, hey guys, how come all yours are pink? You know, what are you doing about this to help students? So anyway, come back to the bottom line is it is working, and it's working tremendously well. So we have some case studies that you can see linked here, but here's just an overall Algebra 1 completion rates by income. You can see that non-low income students have increased over time. Low income students have increased faster. The gap is still significant, but it's closing. And we're excited to say now, if you look at every region of the state of Texas, Central Texas, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, El Paso, Central Texas has the highest Algebra 1 math taking of any part of the state. Even more exciting, I talked about those high performing students in 5th grade and whether they're accessing advanced math. This is the gap, these dotted lines, these are all the different gaps, but the dotted lines are particularly our white high-performing students versus our Black high-performing students, and are they accessing Algebra 1 by 8th grade? That gap has been cut by 3/4, 75% in just the last 3 years. So this work really is changing things by having these kinds of, for instance, opt-out strategies. We've almost eliminated the Black-white student gap in accessing these courses. We're really excited about that. We're working now on 3.0 and into 4.0 on a lot more engagement with families on things like, helping students and families understand, I may be scared about taking advanced math. Am I really ready for this? What are the advantages? So we've put some videos out there and we're updating them right now because course selections will happen typically in February, and we want families to see themselves as saying, yeah, I can sign up my kid for those advanced high school math courses or whatever it is. So we are now in POP 4.0. We're increasing the family engagement, not just with these videos and outreach and posters, but also with focus groups with teachers. Why are which students not taking 4 years of math in high school, things like that. We're building out even more professional learning opportunities for school districts in addition to the NAEP training, some culturally responsive learning training. And we've had 2 years now of summits where we pull together representatives, teams from our higher ed institutions and our school districts, as well as other partners like Carol, to come together and create recommendations for their own institutions and for the region. So you can look at some of the links to the agendas and what we try to cover in these summits. We were really excited this year. We had to do it online, but we had almost 100 people who stayed for 5 hours as a summit to plan and make recommendations about what to do going forward. So in 4.0 and beyond, you can see some of our dashboards and some of our commitments. I want to show you one other thing, is to look at how we're measuring some of these changes. So some of this data is publicly available, and you can see if you just go to the E3 Alliance website and look for data and trends. But some of this I'm going to show you that's only available to, for instance, our district and higher ed partners. These are our cradle to career status of where we are with our objectives and what our targets are. So one of these is 8th grade algebra completion. And we have a chapter that is on our website that you can look at called Math Pathways that will show you things like Algebra 1 completion by 8th grade, hyper disaggregated by income and gender and race ethnicity, and you can start to see which are the students, for instance, are low income males that are least likely to be able to get on those tracks of Algebra 1 8th grade completion, as well as updated charts of these trends over time and other completion rates. But one of the things I also wanted to show you is this is absolutely data that we do not release publicly, but we have comparisons that we'll share just with our school districts of things like, let's look at college aligned math by campus. So what you're looking at is what you're not looking at because the data hadn't come up. Hold on. I thought I brought this up before. Let me see if it's, why is it taking a while to come up? Okay, I'll look at a different data set. So this is middle school Algebra 1 completion. I wanted to show you how college aligned. Let me see if it'll come up one more time. Oh, okay, there we go, for some reason. So you're looking at every high school in the region, from the richest high schools, those with basically no low income students, to those high schools where almost 100% of students are low income. And then on this axis, you're looking at what is their percent, not of all students, but just of their low income students who are taking some college aligned math by the end of high school. So when we show these data, again, if I showed them to Pflugerville, we would have these data labeled around which schools are which. Publicly, we only show the bright spot schools. So these schools that have the highest data points. So what you'll see, for instance, is Manor New Tech, which is, of course, a specialized school, has many, many more of their low-income students taking college-aligned math. That's great. But here's Blanco High School. Here's Pflugerville High School. They have a comprehensive high school where, again, it's just looks like 25% of their low-income students, but that's 3 times some of these other high schools around the region that have far more resources than they do and are not getting their students the opportunities that they need to succeed. So this is some of the data that we share, again, not publicly, but just with districts. And then lastly, I'm going to show you one more example. This is, again, data that we would typically only share with a district. And we shared this at our Math Summit, but we have permission from Hayes. This happens to be Hayes CISD to share it. This is their trend over time on what senior year math courses students are taking. It just in Hayes, not region-wide. You'll see up until 2010, this big bar right here was students who took no math at all in their senior year. Huge, huge predictor that they are not going to succeed in higher ed if they didn't take any math. When we switched to the 4x4 policy, that dropped drastically and students were taking more advanced math courses. Over time, the good news, because we've been doing this, is that while it's raised a little bit after HB5, we don't have a lot more students not taking math in high school because we've been counseling them, even though the state doesn't necessarily require it. You need to take those courses. But also you'll see that there's a lot more diversity of courses. A lot more students are taking not just calculus, but pre-calculus, certainly pre-calculus, but also statistics, quantitative reasoning, other courses that might prepare them for different college majors that aren't necessarily requiring calculus. This was also instructive because you could see the data guys, these guys looked at their data and said, oh my goodness, what happened in 2017? We're trying to get more students into Algebra 1, and there was this huge drop. And what they identified was they had a couple of principals and teachers who had an individual philosophy that said, this is not appropriate for students, had a huge drop in 1 year. So they changed this to a district-wide policy and said, no, that's not okay. It's going to be a district-wide policy of how we put students on that track. And you can see that then it massively jumped back up. So again, we have some spotlights on districts. We have some work on that you've seen in our summits. But I think the bottom line that we wanted to share with you is that this combination of using the objective data to get the insights on what we can change, convening the right stakeholders to build this agenda of what do we do differently? What are the recommended changes in policy and practice, and how do we track them, is allowing us not only to collaborate in different ways and new ways with different partners, but to actually change practices and now to change systems where we see the outcomes in the data that students really are benefiting and gaps are closing because we're able to collectively do things better for students. So I'm going to stop sharing. I will put this link in the chat. I would say, again, feel free to use it and look at it. I wouldn't share it far and wide because I'm not sure Hayes wants all of their data out there in front of everybody. But we can also scrub that from the sheet if you want to have a scrubbed one that you can share. But we wanted to be able to have everybody kind of see the story and the history of how this is unfolded.
Fabulous. Thank you, Susan. And questions at this point, what questions do you all have? And I think, Susan, yeah, if you have a version that you want us to include in our follow-up, I'll get that from you. That's great. Questions? There was some great chat that was happening, and
I did not see any of the chat, so if
that's okay. They were reinforcing and cheering you on along the way and sharing examples. So that was great. I don't think there were any questions necessarily that were coming in just yet. But
I had a
questions.
I had a question, Susan and Tricia. Great presentation. I'm just love what you guys are doing. Every person in the United States should be hearing this data, because I'm sure it's not just a Texas or a Central Texas phenomenon.
Yeah.
So my question is, from an empowering parents and community members perspective, you had the policy tracking document where you talked, is that something that's publicly available? So if parents want to go and talk to their school board about, are you an opt-in or an opt-out district, that they have some something that they can take with them to do that?
That's an interesting question, Carol. We've only used it with our partners in our POP steering committee meetings and in our summits and ways that we track that. But I don't know that we've ever had a discussion about should it be available or not. We see it as a working document. I don't know that we've ever even had that discussion. We certainly have had discussions with individual districts. So for instance, the Round Rock Stony Point feeder pattern, which is their only feeder pattern with a real significant number of high need students, has made huge differences by adopting policies. And they are very public about, next year we're moving to this policy, and 2 years out, you better be ready for this policy. And we have a number of districts, for instance, who have implemented opt out for 4 years of high school math. And they're one of them. So individual districts have been very public with their families, but I don't think we've ever published that policy comparison chart. It is worth taking back.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, knowledge is power. And if people know that this is important, that I think it would really give school districts also something to build off on when they have to make tough decisions, because you're right, there sometimes are teachers who have just operated from an exclusive viewpoint of who's ready to take my classes kind of attitude. And so it's hard sometimes at a district level to counter that. And you need the help of advocates to do it.
Yep. Totally agree.
Leah.
Susan, incredible presentation. I love data and I love driving the program that I run through data. And I think that we all as professionals, either in the secondary space or in higher education, can appreciate the fact that our programs are driven by some of the data that you're creating. So first of all, thank you so much for sharing all that. I am new kind of to the secondary space in policy and inner workings and how things go. So if I seem a little green, that's why. But I am kind of responding as the director of a program, outreach diversity program at the University of Texas in Geoforce and STEMforce, but then also as a parent. And so I have some personal questions and then also some professional questions. But that all being said, so I know that the school and the resources often drive what is being offered, what the students are going into. And so, I'm so for, okay, that's great. Here's the data. Then where are the practitioners that are doing the work, right? Like what's the end product? Right. So I love the data. What do you know about the resources that are being offered at all of the variety of different secondary schools to kind of promote the progression of what you are suggesting? So we know that all of these schools aren't created the same or equal. Sure. Is there any progress in that?
Yeah, I think, again, some of it is local and some of it is dependent on the math curriculum specialist or whoever is driving that. But part of what we've done through the math steering committee, and as I said, it's just going to be updated this month, we're in the process of updating it, is putting out posters and social media posts and things that districts can use that are shared a tiny bit of data, but are mostly about, this is why you should take 4 years of math in high school, course signups are next month, kinds of things to help be able to, communicate in ways that are engaging and understandable and kind of infographic-y and things like that to help people understand, this really is worthwhile. But it takes, one of the other things that we found is that some of the people that we work with on our POP steering committee are fabulous, and typically that would be the math curriculum director or specialist or whatever they're called at that district. But they don't necessarily have a lot of power, right? The principals don't report to them. They're sort of, matrix managed into what's happening in teachers and classrooms. And so that's why to get things like common messages out, we have those summits once a year where we try to get not just the math people, but the whole curriculum and instruction teams, principals, superintendents, all there together so that they have the heft behind them as things move forward. And then they create specific recommendations. This is what our district, this is what our higher ed institution is going to do differently. And there are people sitting at the table who have the power to make it happen.
So with the data on the table, do you consciously and honestly believe that a high school like Pflugerville can reach that 70% that Maynard Tech is at with those low-income students taking algebra courses?
I think that it will take time. I think that they would say, A, we are totally committed to that, but B, we have a comprehensive high school where students are not self-selecting into a STEM high school. And C, we have a hard time sometimes, with the resources, with finding the teachers that can teach enough statistics classes and things like that. And so it is more of a struggle at a comprehensive high school than it is at a small focused high school. But Pflugerville is a great example because they are always one of the first out there and are really committed and, probably adopted the opt-out policy, I think, before anybody else did. And so they're really committed to making these kinds of changes quickly and completely.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
When I talk about teachers and teacher availability, again, I didn't show it, and I'm not sure whether it's on our website or not, but one of the things that we did when in POP 2.0 was mapped course offerings and certified math teachers at high schools across the entire state. And boy, it was just mind blowing how in rural areas in particular, and luckily there's not that much true rural in Central Texas, but in rural West Texas, there are all sorts of high schools where they don't offer any math classes and they don't have any advanced math teachers, and just students have no access to anything unless it's online. Carol asked if we presented the policy recommendations at TASA or TASB. I don't think we ever have. I think that's an example of something that we should do. And Carol, to her credit, has said, damn it, Susan, you all have to publish this all in a peer-reviewed journal. And we're going to do that someday if I pull my calendar out and make it happen.
Well, and I will just reiterate, I threw this in the chat more just to remind myself to come back to you later, but as this collateral is created that you're planning to send to schools, if the ecosystem and our STEM out of school providers and our summer camp folks and everyone that works in this space engaging with schools and teachers, I mean, Leah mentioned it as well. As a parent, we also have this selfish interest in making sure this is happening in our schools. If we can be part of that dissemination network for you and help to spread that word and to get it out to all these folks, I'm going to look at Richard as well, at the Andy Roddick Foundation, supporting and funding and providing this out of school time support and summer camp, learning support, using that network to spread this out. We can hit those beyond the teachers and the administrators, and those parents and those PTAs have some strength, right, to apply that pressure in different ways. So we're happy to be used and abused to spread the message far and wide as best we can.
Cool. I like that. I'm trying to find one thing that may be useful to change. Hold on, just where the heck is this?
While you're looking, any other questions or comments that folks have? And again, I think this is a great example of how, the ecosystem can really come in and support this great work that's being done and connect that collaborative network that Susan has set up with some of the other STEM networks and spaces in our community to really continue to close those gaps and advance that that learning. And I love what Ryan was saying earlier. I made a note of that as well. It's almost now two things that we can think about, tracking students into the algebra and having those opt-out versus opt-in policies, but also advancing the messages and whatever we need to do to get the algebra requirement removed from the CS courses. So it's kind of two things that really we can collectively perhaps work on.
Right. And Tricia, one of the things I was thinking when you asked that is that, again, if you look at our policy implementation map, there are like, I don't know, probably 22 or something individual policy recommendations. And again, not every district is going to do all of them, and they're going to pick and choose what makes most sense for them. And so there's a lot of detail in there. But at the annual summit, we ask them to come back. They spend a significant amount of time saying, okay, that's great, and the math department can implement these, but what is your overall commitment for the next year? And what is your 30-day, 60-day, 90-day plan to achieve that? And so all of our colleges, Austin Community College, Concordia, St. Ed's, whatever, and school districts at this last summit put these down and made them public to everybody else to get feedback from others. So this is a level that's just very simple. Elgin wants 90% of students to complete 4 years of math in high school, and that's what they're going to commit to this year. That kind of thing, I think, would be also easy to share publicly because it's pretty straightforward and simple. And a PTA could say, okay, what can I do to help Elgin get to 90% of students, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be amazing. This is all such great stuff.
So I know you wanted people to be able to get out early. Once you're ready to let people go, can I play the MoMath video, and anybody who wants to stay can dance?
Absolutely.
That sounds like an amazing finish. Tracy, did you want to help us wrap up with the ecosystem a little bit and introduce yourself, please?
Okay. I'm Tracy Mendez. I am a retired senior executive with a passion for education, and I'm on the steering committee of the Greater Austin Ecosystem. So I always have the headset on about what corporations need and can do to support this entire environment. I did have a question for Susan. Great presentation. Delighted to have you here. Do you have, as this ecosystem at large, and there's a lot more players in there, do you have sound bites or a toolkit of what you do want us to share when we're speaking to our teachers, our superintendents as parents, or whether we're down at the legislature trying to educate, especially in this time where everybody is so aware of what education means, what our teachers do for us? We're at a tipping point and we can be a lot more vocal these days and have it resonate. So is there a sound bites or toolkits that you'd say this is authorized? I'm comfortable with any one of us on this call and in the bigger community sharing it without, creating havoc. Because I'm sure going back to my superintendent who's new and saying, hey, my child who has 2 college-educated parents was told to opt out years ago in 5th grade, which I know, yeah. Now here's the good news. It started in Connecticut, but I was continued to have that push here in Texas. So I think as parents, we can do a lot, but bottom line, are there sound bites we can begin to share that furthers your message?
So I'm going to answer that 2 ways. First is that we have some things like case studies that are just 5 slides of here's how we did this, this, and this that we could certainly share. That would be easy. They were not written as sound bites. They were written as case studies, but you could kind of pull that from that. And I think we could maybe put something together that would be useful like that we could share. So sort of, but not probably exactly what you'd want, Tracy, but I think it would not be that hard to do that. But the second sort of embedded thing is, and we've had this debate internally, is we have not taken this to a state policy level. So, we have worked through our partners in the collaborations because we can have deep conversations, we can study the research, we can kind of change mindsets. That's one way to do things, and it's working. Our data says it's working. We're excited about that. there's, you know, the other way to do this is a compliance tool. We could go down to the legislature and say, damn it, you know, we used to have 4x4. You should require that every single student in the state of Texas take 4 years of math in high school, unless there's some sort of, you know, this kind of breakout, you know, option or something. And that would be, you know, that would purely be top-down compliance,
Right.
but it'd be a way to force hundreds of thousands of students rather than tens of thousands of students. And that's not something that we've undertaken, but you could make the case that that's something we should take.
And to help close out, right now the ecosystem is looking at a legislative agenda. That is why we were so excited about having, you know, you, Susan, and Ryan speak today. We appreciate that most things happen bottom up, but if we can help with top down, or if I can call TEA sideways, you know, they could help with policy versus formal legislation. That's what our ecosystem is trying to bring this larger group together, that we can all advocate on a regular basis, especially while we're at this tipping point. Margaret Spelling, who leads 2036, and many of you probably know that name, says we have got to strike right now while the iron is hot. And we'll look forward to any recommendations you have, Susan, especially with sound bites and anything strategically about how we all get out the word very crisply, and obviously don't muddy all the good work that's already done.
Right.
So that would be the closure that I have. Trish, anything else?
No, that's great. I think this was setting us up well for some things that we as the broad ecosystem can do and plug into and amplify. So thank you again to Ryan, and thank you to Susan for sharing. We'll collect any presentations and links from them to be able to share it with everybody again afterwards. So thank you, thank you. So Susan, take it away.
Okay, here you go. Hopefully the sound will come across not too poorly on the other end of Zoom.
And that's how we arrive at C equals 5 over 9. Raise your hand if you know the answer. So, Paul?
Question: why does math matter?
This is the 1 plus 1 is 2. And you know that 2 plus 2 is 4. Yeah, well, that's all good, but then what comes next? You know, what is it even off of? They say that it's boring, that math leads to storing. But what if I told you the math brings so to everything in life? You know I'm right, not to mention we need an intervention to kill the lie that math is lame. You gotta wake up and give a little shake up. You gotta change up the game. Now I'm not joking, I'm trying to be funny when I said a math is time to money. No, I'm not joking, I'm trying to be funny when I said a math is time to money. More math, more money. Don't leave it on the table. More math, more money. Take advanced math in your Bible. More math, more degrees. Don't leave it on the table.
Take no math, then you're gonna take a leave on math. More money, more chairs. Don't fall through the cracks in the crib. Step up your game, gotta make a change. Add it all up and the papers won't flip. Come on. More money, more math. More money, more math. What is you saying? Why is you playing? I'm up by stacks. More money, more math. More money, more math. What is you saying? Why is you playing? I'm up by stacks.
So let me break down all the data in case you're trying to be a hater. Let me set the record straight. It's time to demonstrate why math matters. Here we go. If you want a good job that pays real well, you better listen up, because I'm about to tell you. Advanced math classes are the key indicator of the success of having life later. But it just happens in high school's too late. In fact, you got to go back to grade 8. At a minimum, you need algebra 2. But then it's pick out calculus. AP for you. More money. Don't leave it on the table. More math, more money. Take advanced math in your Bible. More math,
more cheese. More math, more money, more degrees. More math, more money, no joke, not funny. Take no math, then you're gonna take a leave on math. More money, more chairs. Don't fall through the cracks in the crib. Step up your game, gotta make a change. Add it all up and the papers won't
veces más la oportunidad de obtener un diploma universitario.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Susan. More money, more math. There we
That's
go.
exactly right. More money.
Thank you, everybody. We'll share out afterwards. Again, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Susan. That was awesome. Have a great day.
Morning all.
Spectacular.